My role with the Nature Conservancy now, it's a Southern High Plains Grassland Project Manager, and so I help with this called our Southern High Plains Initiative. It's really focused on these last intact grassland landscapes that are left in the Southern High Plains, and we're in one here that we call it the Chalk Bluffs or the Smoky River Basin. You all from the Flint Hills. We've got Red Hills in Kansas, and then another area that we focused in is the Arkansas River corridor there, south of here. So those are kind of how do we put more resources into those areas and outpace some of the threats. So, but here today, they asked me to talk about wildlife and as that relates to resilience. To operational resilience, to drought resilience, and so we're gonna talk about that. We're gonna zoom out first of all, and we asked me to talk about wildlife, so that's what I'll do. But really, that's just one of the ecosystem services that are provided by grasslands, right? I usually lump in biodiversity and wildlife or habitat together, but Society for Range Management actually came up with with these categories, and they considered biodiversity separate. So we usually, when we think about habitat or wildlife, we're thinking about recreational opportunities, things like deer and hunting and that. And then biodiversity may be something different, like a regal fritillary or a monarch. But anyways, just want to step back for a second and talk about those ecosystem services a little more broadly than wildlife or biodiversity. And this is where I spend a lot of my time now. Again, going to kind of start out at a big level and then drill down a little bit. But I think it's important that whenever we're talking about any one of these services that we really look at that full spectrum of ecosystem services, and that every producer, if they're managing grass out there, they're providing some of these services. And we look at just keeping grass green side up. That's providing some of those services, the carbon storage, filtering some water, providing some habitat to some species. Then we look at kind of that next step, and are we managing invasives on that property? Are we using fire to keep the trees out? Are we managing it in a way that keeps it in grass? And then we can go to the next level and we can say, are we using forage-based management? Are we measuring our forage production and trying to find that that forage and livestock balance? And are we monitoring and implementing a forage-based management system? And we can take it to that next step of habitat management. Not only are you doing those things, but you're actually managing habitat for wildlife or for a biodiversity priority. Those are all kind of steps. And then we have different levels of commitments to providing those services. And the one that we heard about last night, that succession planning, we can do things like Grassland CRP, where we have a term commitment to providing some of those services. We can look at different EQIP programs or whatever, and then we have permanent conservation easements and things like that. So on the bottom there, those are the tools, those are the drivers, and you can see that's where technical assistance comes in and helps folks get to a forage-based management plan, addressing limiting factors of habitat, and then the different tools there. So again, thinking about wildlife, in the context, whenever I say wildlife, and we're talking about that, I think we really need to be thinking about that full spectrum of services. And if we're ever going to keep the grass that we have around, the only way we're going to do that is when society hears about grasslands, they think about all those things and not just one thing. The program that I'm working with now, we call it Generational Grasslands, but it's trying to put all those. Well, I think I just mentioned that. It's important that every producer can find themselves somewhere along this spectrum of continuous improvement. And the idea of technical assistance, producer assistance, is helping folks identify where they're at on that spectrum and then how to take that next step to help them achieve their goals. So that's kind of the way that, that we think about this. And that with this Generational Grasslands program, we're trying to, in a spatially strategic way, that is, instead of this shotgun approach, we're trying to put all those things together. We're not asking everybody, to do an easement, and we're not asking everybody to do this or that, but as long as we can, put those things together in a strategic way and keep that grass in grass, then we know that we'll be providing those services over time. The first step there, obviously, the number one, that if we lose grassland, then we're not going to be providing those level of services at all, right? So this is taken from a global analysis that the Nature Conservancy helped out with. But two things from a wildlife standpoint, point out there since 1970, that we've lost. Grassland birds are under the most significant decline of any terrestrial species. So they've really fallen off a cliff there, all of our grassland birds. And then the other one on the right is that 10 million acres of grassland lost in the Great Plains just between 2016 and 2020. That's an alarming statistic, and we've got others that I can talk about from 2018 to 2016, but that's a little different story. And so what's the other major threat in addition to those? Drought and lack of drought resilience. And so when you think about, what's threatening ranches and all those ecosystem services, that is one that in all the Southern High Plains work that we've been doing, that's one that keeps coming up. That grassland resilience, that not just the grassland, but the operational resilience, and that comes in a couple different forms. But I just wanted to touch on this because it really is kind of the key factor there in terms of wildlife management on grasslands too. In general terms, we refer to it as heterogeneity, that all those different things, that diverse plant community, the vegetation height, structure, and we can manage the scale that heterogeneity occurs at. So if you think about a management intensive grazing system, where is the scale of the heterogeneity? Is it within the paddock? If we're out there at a really high stock density and we're moving these things a lot, where is the heterogeneity in that system? Yeah, it's across the whole place, right? And you can look at, this one pasture may be grazed down to nothing, but you really lose your heterogeneity at the scale of the pasture because everything is more evenly utilized. Where if you compare to, say, a continuous season-long grazing, that has really good heterogeneity at every scale, at the pasture scale. And so we can really manage, we can change the scale of that heterogeneity with our management. And that, we'll talk about that a little bit more, but what we're finding is that to maximize wildlife habitat, all the things that make heterogeneity, we really need to have that occurring at every scale, that you've got a little patch that's been grazed heavily, you've got another patch right beside it that's thick and dense, and that's where grassland heterogeneity really thrives. And it's hard to measure heterogeneity. I mean, you got to have a lot of transects, you got to have a lot of those visual obstruction readings or the poles that you guys were using. This is a Robel pole, and we can use, but the point is that we have different species that work as like umbrella species. We know that if those species are occurring in that landscape, there is a lot of heterogeneity, and it's occurring at various scales. And Lesser Prairie-Chicken is one that's in the Southern High Plains. That's actually a really good indicator or umbrella species for that landscape heterogeneity, that you've got different shapes and sizes of grassland. What limits prairie chickens or grouse basically in general, besides conversion to woodland and conversion to cropland, it's really that nesting structure that, and we can think about this, for various wildlife species, but basically every critter's population is limited by some life history requirement. And for upland nesting birds, it's usually that tall residual structure. So they need nesting structure that's 15 to 20 inches in height, with 75% vertical obstruction at 13 inches. So pretty tall, 15 inches tall, and at almost the tallest point of that, if you look at it like this, 75% of that's got to be obstructed. And the better way to say this, Randy Rogers, we had these footballs made up that you throw a football out there 30, 40 yards. With my shoulder, it's more like 15 yards, but if you can see that football, then it's not adequate nesting habitat. So that it's really pretty simple. And at what scale do they require that? Probably about 20% would be a minimum. 20% of a given area needs to have that kind of tall residual grass for grassland nesting birds. And there are various studies that I had in this slide deck, but the one I think that kind of the proof in the pudding is that when we look at landscapes that have the highest remaining populations of this species, about 20% of it is providing that tall residual grass. Like in the case, this is Southwest Gove County. Stacy Hamey's ranch, some of you are familiar with that, is here. And so when we look at the landscape composition there, about 20% of that is in nesting habitat provided largely by CRP. So they really, that goes from a very broad stroke and all the way down to, that plant community that if we take one of those things out of the equation for too long, we're going to have ecological problems. We're going to have problems with forage production and habitat and on down the line. So, by taking out that thatchy grass, a lot of times they allow sunlight down in. Sometimes we have some bare ground out there that allows forbs to come. So it's really important that we add that disturbance to the landscape. Not all grasslands in North America co-evolved with grazing. There are some that basically didn't have large grazers. And so what was the driver in that system? Not very many, but there's just a couple, like coastal prairies, that basically have no historic evidence of grazers. It's kind of interesting. What drove that system? What disturbance drove that system? Fire, yeah. You think about like longleaf pine and some of those savanna type landscapes, they have to have fire to be maintained. But in this system, in the Great Plains, it's grazers. It is bison and other herbivores. So how do we use cattle to achieve that heterogeneity, that wildlife habitat? And I'll use an example from Smoky Valley Ranch. When we at the kiosk there, where we had the grazing demonstration, that was the west side of Smoky Valley Ranch. When we were at Youngkins, we were right across from what we call our schoolhouse pasture, and several of these slides are taken from that area just across the road from Youngkins Place there. But so this is just an example, and the first thing I want to make sure and say is that I don't want to insinuate for a second that this is the answer, or that somehow the Nature Conservancy or Smoky Valley has the answer. That's not what we're saying at all, because everyone's operation is vastly different. There is no one system or magic bullet that is going to provide all these different services or wildlife habitat. So it's just a matter of thinking about the goals, and then how do we take steps toward those goals. And I'll give you an example of what we've done at Smoky Valley Ranch. We have 15 permanent pastures in the ranch. This is just kind of an example of just a way to think about it kind of in a single slide. But basically what we did, starting in 2012, is we made sure, first of all, that we had that animal, that animal demand, that livestock demand, and forage production balance. That was the first thing, and we were able to do that with NRCS's help. They did an extensive range inventory, and so we knew about what our forage production was. So the first step was making sure that we were matching that forage demand with forage production, and we used a little bit more conservative even than a take half, leave half, because one of our conservation targets was Lesser Prairie-Chicken, and we knew that you had to have more residual grass out there. So we, instead of going a 50% total utilization or a 25% harvest efficiency, we bumped that down even a little bit further to 40% total utilization. And so we were trying to put 20% into the cow. And so that was kind of the fundamental first step. And then we did, because we have, as you guys have learned, we have a lot of diversity, a big range of palatability among these different native grass species, right, and forage species. Some of them they won't leave alone, and they'll basically graze out of the stand. We see big blue stem a lot of times in our ditches. Same soil type, a little different hydrology, but big blue stem going all the way up into the uplands, but they're totally grazed out of the stand because we've had, in a lot of cases, continuous season-long grazing of that ice cream species. So what we did is we identified these places that were capable of growing nesting structure. Maybe I'm not interested in the lesser chicken, but I like mule deer. Well, the exact same strategy would apply to mule deer here. So you identify where, which, I got a pointer, yeah. This chalk flat or chalk fan now, we're growing 5,000-6,000 pounds to the acre of biomass in that ecological site. And then limey, maybe a couple thousand pounds an acre, loamy less. And so anyways, targeting that rest at the right time of year in some cases. In our case, we were looking at doing a rest rotation grazing system. And I know you guys have talked a lot about the different systems, and apologize if I'm calling this something different even yet. But basically that you've got one pasture that is left out of that rotation in a given year. So in our case, we actually did a deferment. We didn't graze this pasture for 18 months. That was kind of the, because what that does is that allows that first year, let's say we graze it, and the first year that we go into this, we're going to say April 1, at the beginning of the growing season, we're going to start allowing that thatch to build up. And that it takes one growing season just to get that nesting structure built, and then we've got to let that rest clear through that second growing season, so that the critters, the prairie chickens, mule deer, we're not just growing it and using it in the same year. We're growing it and then using it in the second year. So that's why that 18-month period is really important. Hey, then we coupled the forage-based grazing management, the rest rotation system, with a drought plan that included some of what Keith was talking about. We've got initially we started out with a group of steers, and then we went to a group of heifers, and now we're actually using cow-calf but they're just marked as the disposable herd. And so the tenant knows going into the grazing season that we're only guaranteeing 95 days, and that after that point we have precip triggers basically monthly, and everyone's on notice that if we don't hit those triggers, that cow herd goes home, and then we're able to redistribute the remaining herd. So that's kind of our three-tiered approach there. That includes drought. that drought management plan. Our average annual precip historically is 20 inches, so that's kind of what this bar represents here. I put the red is the number of prairie chickens measured on the ranch. The blue is the amount of precip, over the same scale. And just know that, over these 10 years, we only had 3 that were average or above, but yet our chicken numbers, did really good. But, and part of that was you get that rest out, even in those loamy uplands, we had way more. I mean, it may not have been wonderful species that are a part of the climax community. It was sand dropseed in a lot of cases, western wheatgrass, but those chickens didn't. The wildlife doesn't care what species it is. It's more about the structure of it, and so they really responded. I mean, pretty much across the board. We went from 3 leks in 2013 to 13 leks in 2022. Again, just those 3, the forage-based, stocking rate, the rest rotation system, and, to get us going at least, and then that drought plan. So again, this is just an example of that. I'm going to talk quite a little bit about this rest rotation system because it seems like to me that, and in working with different producers and in different areas in the Southern High Plains, it probably has the highest potential to get that heterogeneity out there, or at least get it going. The other way that people use it is as drought management. It's part of that drought management plan that you've got this stockpiled forage there that, when you're going into a drought, maybe you can hang on longer and graze longer on grass without having to buy a bunch of expensive hay. Maybe you can hang on long enough to get that next rain and not have to sell the cattle. So, I mean, it really does have really good utility for drought management. And then I think about drought resilience as something a little bit different. And there we're talking about what you guys were saying earlier about that more diverse plant community. That is, if this has been managed in a way where there's basically 1 or 2 species left, they're not going to, a plant community with 1 or 2 may not have that species of grass that's going to respond to the next rainfall event when you're coming out of a drought. So if you have a really diverse stand of grass and forbs, and you get rain, in the middle of the summer, and all you have out there is western wheatgrass, a cool season, what's it going to do? Well, it's not going to do anything. But if you've gone in early every year and you've got a monoculture of western wheatgrass, that rain right there in July really isn't going to produce much. But if you've got a really diverse plant community, something out there is going to take advantage of that rainfall. And so that's what we're talking about with drought resilience. We've got a more diverse, healthier stand of plants. It's got better root system. None of that precip is going to run off. It's all going to infiltrate, and that plant community is going to take advantage of the rainfall when you get it. So that's that drought resilience, and then we can also incorporate those in a system for not only stockpiling forage for drought but also for winter feeding. When you think about that 20% that's rested that year, we're not gonna keep that there forever. We're gonna move that around. So it's when we're transitioning from this one rest area to the next rest area, that's when these really can come into play. Not only from not having to feed as much in the winter, but also for this stockpiling for other reasons. For that grazing system to outperform the other grazing systems. And what they found is that with the intensive grazing system, that even with equip, because of the higher input costs, it did not outperform the other 2 systems over time. But I wonder if, and when they say high stocking rate, I thought, I wonder what they mean by high stocking rate. This was in eastern Colorado, and I still haven't, I've been talking to the authors, I still haven't got exactly to the bottom of, what it was your livestock forage balance, what was your utilization goal, what was your forage production measured, and it was it wasn't really exact. It was just based on, the ecological site descriptions. But what it amounted to for a high stocking rate was 19 acres per animal unit for 6 months. And then, doubling that for 12 months, 38 acres per animal unit. So some folks would call that a moderate stocking rate probably in some of those same systems. So it's really important how we define what is high and moderate and low when we're making statements like this. And so that's just one. Another thing that we can think about in terms of rest rotation systems is we can do the same thing basically with fire instead of having that added cost of fence. It's really hard in this landscape because as you guys know, in a lot of years, maybe most years, we're in a burn ban. So fire is just really not an option. So we a lot of times don't have any choice but to use fences to get at that rest rotation. Point out real quick, this is actually a summer burn. So this was the latter half of August, and the prescription, the goal for this was different than what we typically see. This was specifically to target purple threon and to set it back. Part of the old soil bank program in the 50s, just a very low diversity stand. And one of our goals for fire in that particular area is to try to just get more plant community diversity. And so we're, get some fresh regrowth, get rid of some thatch, and get some animals to concentrate in that area, try to jumpstart some plant community diversity. What we'd like to do, but we haven't yet, is do some of these where we are, really concentrating that animal impact at a really strategic time. Like, we burn it, we've got, 3-4 inches of regrowth, and then go out there and overseed it. And then once it rains, let the animals in and try to get them to incorporate, get that seed soil contact, then come off of it. We've been wanting to toy with that, but we just haven't had the ability to do it yet. But that's in the plans. So far what we've done is just this patch burn grazing system. So we've got about 2,000 acres of side oats dominated plant community out there. We look at historic fire return intervals about 7 to 12 years in this system. We just went for a nice even 10. So planning for one burn out of every 10 years. And if you do the math on that, it comes up with 200 acres. So we need to be burning, 10% or 200 acres a year to achieve that 10-year fire return interval. So that's kind of how we plan these out. The reality is that because we can only burn once every 4 years, because we're in a burn ban, we've got to change that. But anyways, that's what we're trying for. But anyways, doing that patch burn graze in that pasture.